1, 2. Hey. Hi. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. My name is Martha. I am an artist. My artist name is Indoor Foxes. Welcome to the Harmonious Benefits panel discussion. So, with us in the room, we have David McKenna, who is the Centre National de Musique from France.
Hello.
And we have Ingried, who's from the Quebec government. She's the Director for Culture in the UK, Ireland, and Nordic countries. And hopefully, touch wood, we will have Catherine joining us, who is the former Culture Minister of Ireland and who was really instrumental in implementing the basic income for artists, which I'm sure we've all heard about. I just want to give you guys an opportunity to kind of we've got Catherine! Just, yay!
Hello.
Just to let you guys know, the connection should hopefully be steady, but it might drop in and out. So if you just bear with us on that, we'd be much appreciated. Do you guys want to briefly introduce yourselves? Catherine, do you want to go first while your signal's steady?
Sure. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. So I'm Catherine Martin. I suppose my background is originally, I studied music at university. I taught music for 20 years, then got into politics. I was deputy leader of the Green Party that negotiated the programme for government in 2020, and then had the privilege of being appointed Minister for Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht, Sport and Media. During that time, I introduced, I suppose, the groundbreaking basic income for the arts, but also during my 5 years as Minister, funding for the arts increased by 97%. I'm no longer involved in politics, and this year I'm delighted that I've been appointed Head of Policy with the Irish Academy in Ireland. So they're really establishing a formal presence there. So I'm still fighting for the arts.
Congratulations!
Thank you.
Amazing. Next on my list, I have David. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, so I'm David McKenna. I am the UK and Ireland consultant for the CNM, which is the Centre National de la Musique. That's a public body that was set up in France in 2020 to support the French music industry, and it absorbed a bunch of different organisations, including the Bureau Export, which was the French music export office that I used to work for. And I also am a music journalist sometimes, and I write about the French underground music for the Quietus website as well.
Amazing. Ingrid, do you want to go next or last?
Yeah, so I used to be a musician for most of my life, touring musician, folk music, trad music. Actually, I came to Scotland because of Gaelic singing. And then the pandemic happened, and overnight there were no more tours, and I saw this great job in the Quebec government office in London. I have lived and toured in the Nordics, and from that office we cover, as you said, UK, Ireland, and the Nordics. So I was lucky enough to get that job in 2020. So now, instead of being an artist, we help artists from Quebec export in those countries.
3 incredible speakers. It's such a privilege to be here asking you all the questions. Today's panel is going to be addressing government initiatives and schemes rather than grants like you might know them. We're going to look a little bit at the sort of cultural policy and the work that's been done by all 3 panelists. So probably the best place to start would be with you, Catherine. Can you just explain to everyone how the basic income for artists came to be and how it functions? Is there an application process? Like, how does it look?
Yeah, sure. So when I was appointed minister, it was June 2020, the end of June 2020, and we were in the throes of COVID, so everything had stopped. And I firstly put together a task force it was called the Arts and Culture Recovery Task Force, and I got them to report back to me. It was a huge sort of group of all representative bodies of arts in Ireland. And they came back with 10 recommendations, and the number 1 was the basic income for the arts, a pilot program for 3 years. I suppose I came from a place where I believe in a universal basic income, so that to me made a lot of sense. But maybe I was in coalition with 2 other government parties, so it took a little bit of persuading to get that over the line. But luckily enough, I was actually on a cabinet subcommittee on the economy, and the following summer it was launched the I suppose the economic recovery for Ireland. So I fought the case up until then. I just solely focused on the arts and the amazing contribution that is made to our economy, and fought the fight for that. And I got that commitment into that in black and white, which then meant in the next budget I could argue for the money for the basic income. And it was launched the year after that again. And it was for 2,000 people of various arts forms, and it was €325 per week. It was based on, I suppose, the minimum wage at that time, and I think it was based on maybe 31 hours per week, and that's how we come up to the €325 per week. Which was really important to me was working with arts organisations in drawing this up. So we did a public consultation, we did extensive consultation with the artistic community in Ireland to make sure that when I brought this and announced it, that it was something that was very much accepted by the communities, that required a lot of consultation with the sector. And what I felt was of equal importance to the actual money itself was the research. I felt, this was a 3-year pilot. I would be gone as minister by the time it would end, and I needed the research. I suspected research which saw the economic value as well as the well-being value and creative output value of this basic income, and it did. And so just recently, the new minister has said it will now be permanent, and he has launched a new one. But just give you, for example, the well-being of the artist improved, the creative output improved, because we also had 1,000 artists who weren't on it. The control groups we could compare, and we had them doing surveys, and started with a baseline survey at the very beginning, and also the group who were being paid that basic income. They had less reliance on other jobs, so they were actually freed. Their mind was freed from that precarious nature of being an artist, of the worry of trying to make money so that you can have the comfort to create. But those in the control group were still trying to do 2 or 3 other jobs while also trying to create. And I suppose the most interesting one, which would have helped the argument to make it permanent, and which can now be used to other places around the world, other governments, is that for every €1 of public money invested in this pilot, society received €1.39 in return. So the net cost of the basic income for the arts actually went from 105 million down to just under 72 million, and that's because of the tax generated, and also those who are in receipt of this basic income were able to move away from social welfare payments, so that there was savings on social welfare as well. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour over how it happened.
I think that gives a really great overview of a brilliant program. It's amazing to see how successful it's been, or to hear how successful it's been. How did you select candidates for this, or artists for this? Was there an application process, or was this from public bodies that you found people?
No, it opened up to everyone through, there was a portal there, and in the first iteration, in the pilot program that I did, there were 3 boxes, and 2 of them you had to tick. So either proof of income earned from the arts, or evidence of having that creative practice, or 3, membership of a relevant representative body. And so if you had 2 of those, that meant you were eligible, and then you applied. And I think over 9,000 applications for 2,000 places. Now, the new iteration of it, it's I was just looking it up because it's quite detailed. You have to be primarily based in the Republic of Ireland. That would have been similar to the pilot. Tax compliant, obviously, that's similar to the pilot. You agree to complete surveys, that's similar to the pilot. You agree to the verification processes if you are selected to be receipt of the payment. So you must give at least 2 proofs now of being, of activity in Ireland to prove that your practice is primarily based here, and 3 proofs in total. And it brings in more sort of, you could still get away with sort of what we had in the pilot, but there's more, I suppose. The argument is it leaning more towards the professional musician, in that bursaries come in, Art Council grants, but I still think the emerging artists can, if they prove that their practice is there. And you do have to allow, and obviously if you're a member of this, you give proof of everything, proof of your creative output, proof of your earnings, proof of being a member of a representative organisation. And it does take, they reckon, about 90 minutes to apply. So it's open at the minute. It's open for a month. It closes on the 12th of May. And the most important thing is to gather all your proof before you log on to complete the application.
Well, if you're watching from the Republic of Ireland, there's your deadline. So I guess that leads into just the point you made about tax and how, for every euro spent, there's, as you say, €1.39 returned into the economy. Yeah. It'd be great to hear a bit from David, because you have the unemployment insurance, which relates almost to taxation in France.
Well, it's called Intermittence du Spectacle, and I believe, Catherine, you were looking at that when you were coming up with the basic income, right?
Yes, absolutely. It formed part of my argument. I was like, look, France has been doing something all along to support their artists for decades. Why can't Ireland do that? And even more with the basic income. So it did help in my persuasive arguments with my government partners. So thank you very much to France.
Yeah, but it's actually a different.
It works in
a different way.
Yeah.
So it comes out. It's unemployment insurance for people that work in the arts and culture sector. And it came about in the 30s, I think, originally. It was for people working in cinema. And then eventually in sort of the late 60s, I think, then it got expanded to cover musicians and people working in the music sector and so on. So the idea is it's because people working in the arts often will work temporary or short-term contracts, and there will be fallow periods where they're not working, so the insurance is to cover that, basically. And you have to work a certain number of hours a year, so it's 507 hours over 12 months. It used to be 10 months, basically. I can't give you exact figures because it changes according to the kind of job you do, and according to the going rates for particular work and so on. But that's the basic idea. You have to rack up these hours, and you can do other work as well. You can do a bit of teaching, but that can't be the full amount. So people are sometimes caught between that, how they're going to make up the hours, and that's maybe the sort of the downside of it is how you make up these 507 hours. And if, for example, you make quite niche experimental music or whatever, then I know a lot of people that do more experimental music, and they're not they don't use the scheme. They're not intermittent because it's just very difficult for them to find enough concerts and shows to keep going. But the plus side, there are great pluses, and it does valorize artists, and it treats them as people doing valuable work.
Yeah, real workers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I have a bit of a follow-up just with you, David. We were talking about CNM, which is a phrase in French that we spent a long time on the phone trying to get me to pronounce, and I just could not do it. But this supports music businesses, so can you just tell us a bit about how supporting music businesses specifically benefits the musical economy and sort of the music making world?
So the CNM, let's say, was set up in 2020. We really got going in sort of September of 2020, so right with COVID happening as well. So that was actually the first job of the CNM was the mechanism through which help was distributed to the music industry in France. But generally, the CNM is a public body. It's under the supervision of the Ministry of Culture, and it receives money directly from the state, but also via two taxes. One is a tax on gig tickets, which pre-existed the CNM, which is it's sort of 3.5% at the moment. And that previously went to one of the other organisations alongside the French Music Export Office that was absorbed by the CNM.
So is that almost like a ticket levy?
Yes, exactly, okay. Yeah. So we have it's sort of, there's a voluntary one now in the UK, but obviously that's very UK to have it voluntary, whereas France it's like...
Beverly! Music for New Trust. Sorry.
So there's that tax pre-existed, and there's also a tax on streaming, which came in 2024. So that also helps to fund the CNM. Streaming services didn't like it. Spotify pulled out of, sponsoring several
womp womp.
French festivals and that kind of thing. So, and there were other criticisms of it as well. But anyway, so that's what comes in, and then CNM then redistributes money through several, what we call commission, But essentially, these are funding rounds, and there's a panel for the ones that I'm particularly involved in, and they're not the only ones, but are the ones that export. So there's for touring and promo, and there's a panel of 14 voters and 14 observers, and so the applications come in, these are voted on there, they get the full amount, which is up to, I mean, it's always changing, but it's up to a certain amount. I've got the exact amounts here, which is
a figure.
Well, there are two levels, but one is between 400 euros and 25,000 euros.
Wow.
But that's up to 50% of the budget presented. And that can only be done sort of 3 times a year and so on. And then there's a higher level of that. And there are also particular constraints, so you have to have 1,000 followers on 2 streaming services, subscribers, and then also 1,000 followers on at least one sort of social media as well.
It's not that high a bar.
It's not that high.
It's a very attainable bar.
Yeah, I mean, it's not bad, and you have to have some kind of sort of rules for that, I suppose, and for things, particularly for the export, for things to be export ready. I suppose the downside is that artists that maybe do more business on Bandcamp and things like that, it doesn't really take that into account, I suppose, yeah. And so there are other schemes for songwriters, recording albums and so on, and that's just through the CNM, yeah.
Fabulous. And then, Ingried, it's interesting to sort of hear a lot of this is all coming back to like artists as workers and artist rights, and I know you've done a lot of work, or you're very knowledgeable about this.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, it would be just great to hear a bit about like what is happening in Quebec, because you have also, similar to the streaming tax you have streaming quotas now that have just passed, right?
Not yet.
Okay, it's coming.
Yeah, it's coming. Well, yeah, if you want to talk about quotas, I can talk about funding later on, or the status of the artist law later, but quotas specifically. So that's not a provincial jurisdiction, so it's actually at the Canada level. In 1971, they put like quotas on radio content. So now it has to be at least 35% of the music played has to be Canadian. And if it's French-speaking radio, it's up. It goes to 65% of French music. So that means basically on any radio, there will be 1 in 3 songs that will be Canadian, and 2 out of 3 will be in French on a French radio program. So, of course, radios are maybe not matter that much today. So last year in Quebec, we passed the Bill 109, and it aims at putting quotas on live streaming platform or on any platforms, and that includes Netflix and Spotify and like
it extends beyond just music, right?
Yeah, but it's not yet like, I mean, the bill passed, and now they're going to put rules and regulations and how to control it and how to apply it. So
amazing. I'm sure we can come back a little bit to that. I actually would really love to hear about the sort of labor rights work that you've done with musicians and artists, because we were talking about the statute of rights as well in France. Sounds like there's quite similar schemes?
Yeah, well, I was surprised to learn that it's only in Quebec and Canada that we have the Status of the Artist Act, so that's actually a law. In Quebec, it was passed in 1987, and a few years later, in 1992, Canada said, oh, we'll do the same. And that law just states that artists, even if they're freelancers, they have a special status. They're like any other workers, which means it gives them the right to unionize, basically. So that law helped create a lot of artist associations, not only in music, but in any art form. And those unions, they can negotiate like collective agreements, which will guarantee like minimum fees, minimum working conditions, the reuse rights, and so on. And that law was modernized in 2022, following, of course, the pandemic, and they added a lot of stuff like legal aid. There's also now a $2 million emergency fund for emergencies, clearly, like COVID. There's also, I think they added a lot of resources for harassment and or if you have grievances with your employers and so on. So basically, through this law, you're protected as an artist as any other worker.
Sounds like being an artist in Quebec is pretty good. I'm going to Quebec. So I guess what what I would like to know then is what are the costs and risks of running initiatives like this? And, you know, for particularly in Ireland, like I know we touched on it a little bit, but how do we continue to incentivize new and quality work if we are the ones funding artistic careers, or if the public bodies are the ones funding the artistic careers? And then how do we justify spending public money on the arts? Everyone's struggling, every sector is seeing cuts across the world. Why is this so important? In your own words. I mean, we all know why it's important, but would anybody like to go first?
Well, I can go first. Oh no. I'm just going to say, of course, we all know it has amazing benefits on health and you know, cultural cohesion and so on. But I would say in Quebec, there's another thing. Like we're 9 million or 8 million French-speaking people in. I don't know how many people are on our continent. There's 40 million in Canada and a couple of 100 million in the US. So for us, we've always, since the 60s, like we're the first Ministry of Culture in North America. And we've always, and any government from right, left, and center has always funded very generously culture because it's our only way to exist and to keep existing in a continent full of people who are different than us.
Love that.
I mean, the French have always been quite forward in exporting sort of their culture and viewing it as soft power, I think. And, you know, more recently have realised that music is part of that. So I think that's a side of it, and sort of the supporting export. I mean, just last year, it was not something that came from the CNM, but Macron decided he wanted a music equivalent of, you know, the French president Macron decided he wanted an equivalent of Paris Fashion Week that would be Paris Music Week. Ooh. Eventually, it was decided that it would be called France Music Week, so it wasn't just so Paris-centric. But yeah, that was quite a big event that involved the CNM and Auditoire, who were responsible for organising the Olympics, the Paris Olympics opening and closing ceremonies. So I think there's that side of it as well, but also generally there's just you know, the arts have traditionally been valued within France, and as you say, sort of governments, whether more to the right or more to the left, have generally had to at least pay lip service to the arts. If the far right get into power, that might change. But one of their explicitly stated that they would get rid of the CNM if they get into power. So
well, that's great.
Yeah. So
love that.
So, but very very important to protect the arts. But as I say, I think it's there has been traditionally a view that artists are important, they do important work, and you know, apart from subsistence in life, what else? What are we here for? You know.
Absolutely. Catherine, it'd be great to hear your perspective as well, and also just with the fact that you are funding, you're giving people a basic income. How are we then like keeping people going as creatives and making good stuff, making careers, you know?
Yeah, well, I think we have to look to the most awful time, I suppose, for our musicians and for our creatives, which was COVID, you know, when the music basically stopped, live music stopped, stages were closed, the doors were closed, to remember how much we missed it at that time, but also how much we leaned into it at the worst of times. So many of us were listening to music in our homes and listening to whatever's happening on radio as well to help our own well-being. So it goes to, I think, you know, music and the arts goes to the very heart of, like I'd always say in Ireland, to the very heart of who we are as a people. And, you know, as was said there, you know, in relation to the soft power, you know, at a state occasion, a big state ceremony, you'll always have music. I'm sure when we take over the EU presidency now in the summer, there'll be our arts and our music will be on show and showcase. And so I always made the argument as when I was in the position as minister, we have to start talking, but actually showing the artists that we truly value them. And that was my argument for the basic income. And I do believe what we're doing with the basic income is going really further than any support I know of, in that the basic income is offered to artists and creative arts workers, not as a social protection support, but simply it's a recognition of the intrinsic value of artistic practice. And it's allowing our artists, allowing our musicians, allowing our songwriters, allowing our creatives just to focus on their practice and then be fairly compensated for it. And that's what the basic income. And I've said before, the basic income for the arts, the BIA, the acronym, is actually the Irish word for BIA. That's why I chose it, because I love our Irish language too. That certainly goes to our national identity too. But and to me, you know, we need nourishment. Everyone needs the nourishment, artistic nourishment. But equally, we can never forget that our artists need sustenance and support, and that's why I called it BIA. That's why the name was given. So we just cannot forget that, of the intrinsic value of them. And then it's our duty then, if we get into a position as legislators, to legislate and make policy changes that recognises that.
I just want to add also, we all saw it during COVID. Suddenly, like, artists defeat a big ecosystem, and suddenly, well, the artists can play, so many people were out of work because of that, you know, prop people, costumes, stage, and so on, and I can go on. So yeah, it has a big impact on society.
I think I saw somewhere that artists are the biggest employers in the world. Something like, you know, musicians, because there's so many people that work in the teams, so something like the biggest employers in the world, as like individuals. Fact check that one, as Michael would say.
Yeah, and if I can just come in on that, and the basic income, it was creative arts workers as well. So, and it's exactly what you're saying there. It's the creative art worker is the you know, the people who make a key contribution to a production, so, or an interpretation of the arts. So if you're thinking about staging a play, the playwright is the artist who writes the work, but to produce a play for an audience requires, you know, many skilled creative people, including actors, directors, lighting designers, costume designers, and all those are included
100%.
for the basic income. They're captured in that.
Fantastic. So I guess this ties in quite nicely to my next question. How do certain rules balance with the financial realities of grassroots venues, for example, and other support structures which serve as incubators for artists? You know, do managers and independent promoters and all these kinds of people enjoy the same benefits as artists on each of your respective programs and initiatives?
There is help via the CNM and elsewhere that isn't just for artists. I mean, it's particularly the way the CNM works anyway. We work with French companies, basically, so we're a company in the music industry. So actually, artists that we help don't have to be French nationality. They don't need to have a French passport. It's whether the company investing is French. So it's the publisher or the label or the agent or the management company that will apply for funding. So there's firstly that, but also there is help for festivals and digital startups and things like that as well. Outside that, you have in France, one example I can give is there is, and because this is important to actually the sort of ecosystem that's there and the path to maybe not success, but to sort of, at least there are ways of making progress, particularly as a live act in France. You have a network of subsidised venues called SMAC, which is Centre de Musique Actuelle, which are, they've funded venues all throughout the various French regions. And they have their music venues, but they also have a role in terms of supporting and developing young acts. So they will work with local artists, and depending on the SMAC, the artists might have access to rehearsal rooms 24 hours a day and things like that. And they will also be given.
Wow.
They will also be given. I've heard of one where they had just a swipe card and they could just go in and use it any time.
That'd be unreal.
And they'll also be given sort of advice on how to develop their stagecraft, and then what happens is between the SMACs, they will start swapping artists and people, so people can maybe go on smaller regional tours, and that circle can widen with, they're called tremplins, but they're basically sort of talent contests, essentially, that usually often attached to a festival. There's a festival called Printemps de Bourges, and Les Inuits de Printemps is a tremplin, this sort of talent contest that occurs alongside the festival. So these sort of circuits allow you to sort of build, build your career, particularly as a live act, because for that tremplin you might then go on and play the main festival, you can get booked to other festivals and so on. But that comes out of state subsidies for these SMACs, these subsidised venues, basically.
Fantastic. Do you guys have anything you'd like to add?
Well, I can explain how it works in Quebec. we try to fund the whole cycle, basically. So there's a lot of support for the schools at first, and for artists in schools, because that's how kids can find out that they actually want to do that kind of career. And then to get proper training, and then when you're a young artist, you can ask for your first grant, for your first project, and then there's also funding when you're more advanced. We have two main funding bodies. One, our Arts Council, which is called the CALC, which funds individual and non-profit organizations. And then we have SODEC, which funds cultural companies and enterprises. And it's thanks to them, actually, that tomorrow the M for Montreal showcase will be presented. But they don't only fund like artists and creators, they also fund producers, but also, as I said, schools, but festivals and venues. And I know that sometimes back home I have musician friends who are like, oh, I didn't get my grant, I never get any grants. But I'm like, yeah, but you maybe played in the culture house, you maybe played in a festival, and that's an indirect like grants, because those events are really supported strongly. And for example, in Montreal, there's a big network of cultural houses, and it's always free. So which means that they can hire like emerging artists. They really they can take a lot of risks. They will still have a full audience, and it's an amazing way to help like the local bands to live in.
I guess then for me, how are the economic returns measured? Like in terms of, we spoke a little bit at the start about Ireland, but for you guys with these systems, it sounds like the funding is extended really broadly throughout the music sector. Are you seeing meaningful returns on investment here, whether that be like culturally or with tourism and export or financially?
I can speak, for example, about France, because we talked about radio quotas.
Yes, very briefly. We'll come back to that. Don't
we're
worry.
going to come back.
I got so much more to ask you about that.
Okay, all right. But yeah, and certainly, again, I don't have exact figures, but it's through the Bureau Export, which is the export office before, and the CNM. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly been since because the Bureau Export was the first export office in the world, so that started in sort of mid-90s. So when you had sort of French touch going on, and certainly the visibility of French artists around the world, and for example in the UK even has increased considerably. I'm not saying that's all down to the work of the Bureau Export or the CNM now, but that's part of it, and certainly it's because, and particularly in France, because of these subsidies, artists are a lot better paid for gigs and so on, and they're much better treated than they are in the UK.
Facts, by the way.
So it made touring for French artists, if you're doing it the first time, is a shock when you go outside France and you're like, you come to the UK and you're like,
come to the UK and it's like, yeah, you can have £80 and 4 beers.
Exactly, if you're lucky. So it's a pretty rude awakening. So having the help the CNM gives for touring, for example, makes certain tours possible that wouldn't be possible otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a key thing. So in terms of getting acts touring, that's a big, and just being, having people in other countries being exposed to them is.
So it's quite a big export element, and like international.
It's part of it. I say the CNM is a bigger thing that also does market studies, tries to imagine the future of the music industry,
absolutely,
and all sorts of things. But yeah.
What about for Quebec or Ireland? How are you feeling about your return on investment?
But if I can just come in, and it's to that maybe, and to the previous question on the live venues and so forth.
Absolutely.
I suppose another focus in recent years that I had was on the nighttime economy in Ireland, and really supporting those grassroots venues that help provide the stage for emerging talent. But those venues and the nighttime economy in Ireland, especially in rural Ireland, are what help a thriving, bustling. If you're talking about economic return, it brings life into towns that may otherwise be very quiet in the evening times. And what we did was we've piloted 9 nighttime advisors, so Dublin City, but then other towns and cities across Ireland, who link in and help, I suppose, the nighttime economy. And I know recent announcements would be like buses are now being provided as part of that. They identified this was a problem in rural Ireland. How do the people get in and out to the late night events that are being funded? And now there are 3 pilot buses being run till late in the evening in the west of Ireland and in the Midlands as well. And with the venues, we first established that relationship during COVID because they were on their knees financially, and we started funding them. But they're still suffering. So in my last year, I introduced an initiative which is continuing now, and it's at the minute it's €1 million initiative in Ireland supporting venues to put on, and it must be original music. So it's supporting that new original composer and artist to help them with their rising costs, and also our museums and galleries. In Ireland that usually shut at 5 or 6 in the evening, we give money to them as well to open their doors to music, to poetry readings, and bring in a whole new audience. I always remember the first one in our National Concert Hall in Dublin. They had late night DJ, and they said it was incredible. In the concert hall, a whole new audience of people arrived in through the doors of the National Concert Hall, which I think is magic to introduce a whole new audience to a national cultural institution, but supporting artists as well. Because I think we have to focus on our venues that have that important role, and also the nighttime economy. And that is, once you're doing that, there is economic return because you're supporting something that is usually quiet. Now you have a bustling economy at nighttime, and that's what you get back in return.
There we go. There's the economic benefits. Would you like to add anything about Quebec?
Well, I don't have exact figures, but for us too, it's very important to export because we're only 9 million people, so it's a relatively small market. And actually, if I come back to that, there's not only the venues and the festivals that are supported, but as I said, showcases like M for Montreal, Mondial Montreal, and Pop Montreal. They really put the Quebec on the map, and I think that's why so many. You probably know a good bunch of bands from Montreal, and it's on the map because there's all those supports and all those events.
We also have the M for Montreal showcase. I think that we have a specific showcase tomorrow night for Montreal artists, so definitely worth going to. Last year they were crazy. Was Superplage last year?
Yeah, it was last year.
Unreal! Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting distracted. Amazing. So I said I had questions on radio quotas, so I'm going to go on to them. Olaf used a fantastic word in an email describing what's happened to BBC Radio Scotland, which was, am I allowed to say it? Enshittification. Yes! Both France and Quebec, though, you both have radio quotas that are more specific to language. So you have francophone radio quotas. In Quebec, you also have Quebecois produced quotas. Am I phrasing that right?
I think on the Canadian side, it just has to be Canadian content.
Right, okay.
And if you're a French-speaking radio, you have to broadcast a certain percentage of French music, but it doesn't have to be from Quebec.
But it sounds like these have been, a boon for artists, labels, and music publishers. So can you guys give us a quick, radio quotas for dummies explanation of how they work, and then we'll maybe talk about how it's impacted the artists and the artists?
Okay, I'll start with the French quotas. So yeah, as was mentioned, they're about the language, and really it had nothing. It wasn't about specifically targeting radio. It was a law that came in '94, and there's a minister called Toubon, all good, as they called him as a joke, and it was about the French language and protecting the French language across various spheres, not just on the radio. But the result was that this quota came in, which was for 40% of music being played on the radio had to be French language, and French language meaning I think up to about 80% of the lyrics had to be in French. There are variants on that, depending on what kind of station you are. If you're a new music station, there's a sort of, you have to play a certain amount of new music, and if you're more of a nostalgia station, then you have to play more French language music. And it was also altered more recently because what radio stations were doing was filling up their quota with just the same few tracks, basically. So there's a limit now on how much you can do that.
Just playing loads of Deacon Blue.
For example, yeah, or
Right,
whatever the
cool.
French the French
Whatever the
Deacon
French.
Blue are.
It's just all Deacon Blue and the Proclaimer.
Yeah, yeah. So there's
Yeah, I
a limit
love
on
that.
how many of like the top most popular songs, French language songs you can play. Obviously, French radio stations don't like it because they don't get to play what they want to play. In terms of who benefits, well, firstly, French artists that sing in French, they benefit within France. I mean, in terms of who benefits overall, economically, like with most things, it's the major labels, because they can put the marketing behind French language singers, and they can make sure they're in the ones getting played the most. So that's who benefits the most. But and the artists themselves. But just to give you an idea, and also give you an idea of one of the unintended effects of the quota. So last year's the top 10 album sales in France were all French artists, and they were all French rap or R&B artists. And that was another impact of the quotas, which was definitely not envisioned, I believe. I don't know if he was a fan of rap. I don't think so.
I'm, to be fair, a big fan of French rap.
So
it's
am I.
Awesome.
So am I. But
it's so good.
But I don't think Toubon, who when he brought the law in, was a fan of French rap. So I don't think he envisaged that what this would do would be like, well, stations looking around for French language content. And so what you've got in France, you've got Variété, which is like the mainstream kind of pop stuff. So that would be in French. Other than that, you had, rock artists would tend, particularly in the sort of the 90s, would tend to sing in English for various reasons, partly because they saw it as that's the language of rock music, like German and Italian are the language of opera, or because they felt the weight of like the French language, this sort of literary French that was also in kind of 60s chanson, these very poetic lyrics, and they felt freer to write in English, all sorts of reasons anyway. So rock music wasn't going to get in, but there was loads of rap music, which and rap artists tend to want to express themselves in. They're talking about their local
home language.
Yeah, their homeland and their local reality and all these things. So yeah, you got like Skyrock, which is a radio station that grew out, which is kind of almost pretty much all rap and R&B. So yeah, the result. I'm not saying that's the only reason for the success of rap in France, which by the way is the second market in the world for rap music after the US. Second biggest market. But I think in terms of laying the groundwork for where French rap is now, the radio quotas had a big influence. And again, it was an unintended influence, I think, of the quotas. And now it dominates the charts.
So as I said, that was the quotas came in Canada because they felt that their radios it was only American music. So in 1971, they said, okay, let's put a quota, and the quota now is 35% of Canadian music.
Little did they know Justin Bieber was coming along.
And then for French-speaking, as I said before, French-speaking radio, they have to broadcast 65% of French language music. It doesn't have to be Canadian or Quebec. And there's also restrictions on when it has to be broadcast, like 55% of that has to be during peak hours, because they don't want you to play 2 hours of of French music between 2 and 3 a.m., But yeah, obviously it had huge impact. We don't have figures, but just that means like royalties flowing through that ecosystem. And as we said, it's not only the artist, it's everything. It's the studios, the producers, the labels, anything that benefit from that and make sure that the ecosystem exists. And also I can point out that, for example, in Quebec, we were big consumers of our own music. But now that radio is maybe not the main way we listen to music, we're starting to see that's going down, obviously, because, again, the online platforms, they don't have those same quotas, so it makes a difference.
Okay, I've got 2 quick-fire questions. We've got 6 minutes, and then we're going to take questions from the audience, so you better prepare them. You've got 6 minutes to think about it. Each of you can give an answer for these. First one is, what's next? What lies ahead? For you, maybe basic income. For you, maybe the streaming quotas. I'm not sure about for France, but if anyone wants to just jump on.
I'm happy to go in. Just to say, I forgot to mention, we do promote our touring artists as well and musicians around the world with Culture Ireland. And what's next is, I hope that the learnings and the research from the basic income for the arts could lead to other governments around the world adopting this as a crucial support to lift away that precarious nature of being an artist and just allowing our artists to do what they do best, which is create. And I ought to say I've been there, I've been at the cabinet table, I've made all the arguments, we have the research, it can be done now. So it's not a case, can it be done? It can, we've done it and we have the research, and I'm hoping that the research we have in Ireland will help others, persuade at the cabinet tables across the world to do this.
Fab?
I mean, I guess my pessimistic concern is that as things move rightward, generally, that these sorts of rights that, that I guess have been taken for granted for a long time, and as they should be, I don't think, that's a bad thing, in France might get eroded, and there have been signs of that. So I think that's the pessimistic view. I think in terms of, and, the other thing is that every system has its weaknesses. Like I said about the intermittence, there are problems with that. In terms of the minimum, that musicians have to be paid all the time, which is great in principle, but, I had, for example, a French jazz agent asking me, basically something like, I don't know if you know Total Refreshment Centre in London, which was like one of the hubs where sort of the UK jazz scene, and the London jazz scene, particularly the new scene, which isn't that new anymore, but anyway, grew up, but partly because people could just get together and jam, and it could be quite spontaneous, and the French system doesn't really allow for that spontaneity sometimes. Yeah. Obviously, it's still better that people will get paid, and obviously, there's sometimes people look at the UK a bit jealously and say, oh, everything's DIY, and that makes things stronger. I think that might have been relevant in the 80s where people could live cheaply and live off the dole. I don't think that's relevant relevant anymore. And people get caught between. Another London, sort of UK-based French artist I know is basically that situation where last album's getting good reviews, it's touring a lot, but the revenue is not huge from that, and at the same time that gives them less time to do the day job that allows them to live. So they're caught in this kind of in-between situation. So nothing is perfect in terms of the system. I mean, the ideal thing, we've got basic income, the ideal thing would be universal basic income.
Yep. Retweet.
To be honest, I don't think everyone has the right to make a living from the music they make, but everyone has the right to be able to not have to make a living from whatever artistic practice they want to pursue. And I think universal basic income allows for that. So that would be the ideal future for me. But
UBI for France, then, hopefully.
UBI for the world, yeah.
Yeah, UBI for the world. Hell yeah. Really universal.
Yeah.
And then for yourself, what's next?
Well, I will stay in the what's going on. I mean, that would be so nice. But
yeah, that was the dream. But
that was the dream.
Utopic thinking.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it before. So now for policies in Quebec, it will be to implement that new bill 109. How are we going to apply quotas to online platforms? And we're ready. We know that we will have to fight every step of the way. Even at the moment, Canada is renegotiating this collective agreement in North America, the ACEUM. So it's just like, and we know that we'll have to fight to keep arts and culture as the cultural exceptions, that it's, so yeah, that's where we are.
Wonderful. I think we'll work in reverse order then for the next question, which is what's your advice to a government or government body looking to implement policies and initiatives similar to the ones that you guys have all worked on? Any takeaways, learnings, blah, blah, blahs? Don't do it, it's awful, it's the worst.
No, always do it, I think.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, always do it. I think it's, again, the point is that, so I think with the Irish scheme, like the French system, more people can apply for the money, or to apply for the unemployment benefit, but again, there are more conditions attached, I think is my understanding, compared to the Irish basic income.
So what would your advice be then, there's obviously differences between all three countries, just culturally, but also between the nitty-gritty of the policy. What would your advice be to, for example, Scotland or anywhere else in the world? I
mean, I prefer the no strings attached, or the fewer strings attached option, I think, that's, in my sort of utopian vision of universal basic income, it would be that. So that would be good, but then again, it has to be how many people have access to that. So yeah. I think intermittence is not perfect, but it's a pretty good system, and it also covers not just music, but the wider cultural sector. So it's not a bad route to go down, but also it can be amended, it can be adapted.
It's plastic.
Certainly, it's plastic. Yeah,
absolutely. Ingrid?
Yeah, I would say the most important is that societies and government value culture and arts. I mean, when you start to say, "Oh, don't study in arts, that's a lousy job," it's really bad. I mean, it's just value, recognize that it brings a lot to your culture and to your society, and then finance it accordingly.
Catherine, do you want to close us out with this one?
I guess I always felt, I had to fight hard for the funding I got and for the basic income, and I always said, and I still do, I don't think it should have to be that hard of a fight, because we should be valuing our artists. So it's about really making all politicians from all parties and none, becoming your political champions and making that argument that, the arts need to be supported, they should be budget priorities, not something that should be dropped in time of fragile economic circumstances. So like all the world is feeling fragile at the moment, that doesn't mean we should just go, okay, let's cut the arts. If anything, it should be the opposite argument. That's when we should be focusing on the arts to support them. And I think then from the other side, if I was to think about that basic income and the fight to get it over the line, to say when it comes to policy that you want to get over the line, you really believe in, you need to work with others, so you can't be working in silos. And I think the artistic community came together as one, and from the initial day of the task force that made the recommendation to linking in with the department. And it wasn't that then the minister, myself and the civil servants went off on their own and did it. It was working together along the way, the public consultation, the consultation with the artists, coming together as one voice, working together to make something happen, and never to underestimate that. And also when it comes to these key policy changes, remember at election times, like you have in Scotland and Wales, for example, get those onto the manifestos, the key policy changes you need, get the pledges over the line and follow through on that when you see who gets elected and who made those pledges publicly to support. So that would be my take, and I just absolutely agree the value, the intrinsic value of the arts to everyone.
Well, thank you so much, all three of you, for answering all these questions and for your time. I have 8 minutes to take questions from the crowd. There are 2 rules. One of which is you must wait for the microphone or people streaming won't be able to hear you. And the second is that we need to keep them really short so that our panelists have an opportunity to answer. So if you can just keep it to questions only, and if you have a story or anything else you'd like to say to the panelists, apart from Catherine, everyone else will be kicking about today. So you can find them afterwards. So yeah, we've got first question here.
Hi, thanks, you're doing great work. Do we use the example of the fundamental right-wing Republican Christian in America who got an oil field from his father in Texas and is beginning to close it down because he sees the money in renewables? Doesn't believe in climate change, but believes in money. Do we use that example as a way to convince, hopefully, centre-right and right-wing governments we have to start funding art like it's infrastructure, which is what it is? You fund it like schools and roads and hospitals. We all need art. As a species, we come from art. It was language before it was language. This hopefully shouldn't be hard to convince people of, but if we can't, show them the money, as Ireland did. That's not a question, it's a statement. Do you agree? There we go, question.
What's your hot take?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of who I work for, the CNM, I mean, that was certainly, that was something that had been on the table for a long time. Under different governments, it had slightly different names, and then it kind of went on the back burner and kind of came back. But obviously something that would not exist without the economic benefits of it being stressed. Even despite the French love of culture and all those things, you have to justify this, and the industry has to be on board. And what the CNM does is bring kind of all the players in the industry around the same table, certainly in theory. In terms of the funding rounds, you've got representatives of management, people across management, publishing, labels, all areas of the industry, really. So, yeah, I mean, that wouldn't have got anywhere without people having made a strong economic case. And so, yeah, I think you have to have both, absolutely.
I'm just going to say that the figures are there. There are economical benefits and outcomes. It's just we have to repeat them 5 times until they hear it, because they don't want to believe it.
Anything you want to add there, Catherine?
Yeah, no, it's the money argument is always the one. That's my experience from being at the cabinet table. It has to make financial sense, the economic benefit, and that's what you had with that research. That's why I felt it was probably even more important, than the actual money that was being given to the artists, because it would help make it permanent, and that's what happened. If you think that €1 became 139 to back to society, tax generated, savings and social welfare. The artists being able to hire other people to help them with their creativity, and it's when you're down to like the final arguments or trying to persuade other cabinet colleagues in Ireland, finance department and Department of Public Expenditure, that's the argument that it comes down to. Like we all get it, about the intrinsic value of the arts, what they mean to us. But that won't work at cabinet level. You have to have that money argument, and now we have that with the basic income, and that's why I say I hope that research will help others.
Thank you for your question. I think you had one here, and then we'll go down to the front. Thank you.
Hi, I really enjoyed listening to all of you speak. Thanks so much. This might not be a question you can answer because you're not based institutionally in the UK or in Scotland, but as a freelance artist, it's quite hard to stay abreast of some of the positive legislative changes to artists' rights in the UK. I was just wondering if you had anything that we should be aware of, as a positive or encouragement for the future in the UK and Scotland for some of these changes that might be happening here.
I've tried to be a musician in the UK. I live in Scotland. I'm based in Scotland, and very quickly I ended up going back and forth between Canada because it was so much easier to make a living out there. So I don't know. I think it's basic conditions, basic working conditions that have to be agreed on, and that means that, everybody has to not play unless they're paid a certain number. I don't know. You just have to raise the...
Unionize.
Yeah, unionize,
I think just the problem with the UK is just how everything's so disparate. You have to go and just search all over. There isn't this spirit of coming together and let's find a solution, a common solution. Sort of in terms of the industry, certainly. I mean, I know that there are efforts, but they're people kind of fighting, sort of going against the stream, really. But any initiatives which encourage more, whether it's Music Venues Trust and people and organisations like that do great work. So more of that and more people talking to each other really is the only way forward.
I would just say, as an artist in Scotland as well, if you're looking for resources, the Scottish Music Industry Association, PRS and Musicians Union, all of their newsletters are a great source of information if you're just looking for that info. But beyond accessing resources, I would definitely try and speak to PRS today because they're so knowledgeable. And I think Stuart is kicking about somewhere. I don't know if he's in here though. Anyway, Catherine, is there anything you want to put in?
I suppose speaking with my Irish Academy hat on, for singers and songwriters, the website's amazing for those resources, for those supports. And look, only in the last year, the per diems, the success on that for songwriters. And I think in Scotland the debate has started on the basic income with the election, so that's a good thing. I think also we need to look at dignity at work for our artists, for our musicians. We have a safe to create, a binding code. So, for example, for the venues, the live venues, those grassroots venues, to one of the criteria is that they sign the code. Which is, protection of the artist's basic dignity to work. That can be seen on safetycreate.ie. It's something we brought in the last few years as well, because we have to be sure that our artists feel safe when they are employed, when they get the gigs, etc. So, or at the festivals as well. So that's all I have to say on that.
We have 1 minute left for maybe one more question.
Yeah, go on. Why not?
Mic him. Get him mic'd. I love your glasses, by the way.
Thank you. Just so it seems like, so data is obviously really important in the ability to make these things happen. Are there things that artists can do to help people like you make these in terms of what they're doing with their streaming, what they're signing up to, what organisations they're becoming part of? Are there ways that artists can help bring the data that makes the case?
It's exactly that. If we have helped you and if it has generated outcome, we always tell the artist, tell us, because we're going to put it in our report, and it explains why it's so important that we do what we do. So it's, and I know we have so many things to do when we're an artist, and you don't necessarily think about that, but when you have a grant and you have to fill up a report, it's very, very important, because it explains why the grant was important.
Yeah, I mean, I work more with artist teams, but obviously that means sometimes working directly with artists, and in some cases the teams are the artist and they've got their own company and things like that, or all the way up to majors where obviously you're dealing with lots of stakeholders. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, for example, we work with showcase festivals around the world, so what we need from team, we need feedback on that. You know, what kind of results did you get from that? How many people did you get to speak to? And obviously to apply for funding, people need to give us, because there's also funding for, you can just work for a record label and go, well, I want to go to Germany and meet people, and how many meetings, and you can get funding for that trip as well. So obviously you need to back that up with how many people you met, who they met, how important that is to your to development of your label or to the particular artist you're working with. So yeah, it all has to be backed up with for the funding applications. Yeah, and again, as well as streaming, stats, and I say social media, press, all those things are crucial. Yeah.
Any final comment, Catherine? And then that's us.
Again, I would just speak from songwriters and composers of the Irish Academy. Yeah, you have to we have to be informed of what you're experiencing in order to act on it and campaign on it. So that's all that's essential.
Well, thank you so much, everybody in the room. Thank you, everyone online who's watching. And most of all, thank you to our panelists. If everyone can give them a big round of applause, please. And yeah, everyone will be, well, all three of us will be kicking about. So if you have any questions or you want to have a conversation, you can either find our contacts on the White Days app, or you can go for a wander and find us.